All
Yeah.
right, Shalom. Acts chapter study, Acts chapter 15. Last week we read 1 to 21. Last week we broke down half of this chapter. We talked about the argument that the individuals had was not with the Torah, but with the instructions pertaining to circumcision, and that they believe that the circumcision is what makes you saved, according to verse 1. It says, certain men which came down from Judea taught the brethren and said, except ye be circumcised after the manner of Moshe, you cannot be saved. So circumcised after the manner of Moshe. That's talking about the commandments pertaining to circumcision. He then says it again in verse 5. It says, but there rose certain of the sect of the Pharisees which believed, saying that it was needful to circumcise them and to command them to keep the law of Moses. This is one of the things that gets people confused, because it's not talking about the entire law of Moses. It's talking about the laws pertaining to circumcision specifically. The same dudes that rose up in verse 1 is the same dudes that went to Jerusalem and try to pose their argument in verse 5. We also saw that Peter stood up and revealed that the Gentiles or the nations started to receive the Ruach, just as they received the Ruach in verse 7. It says, and when there had been much disputing, Peter rose up and said unto the men and brethren, you know how that a good while ago Elohim made a choice among us, that the nations by my mouth should hear the word of the good news and believe. Elohim, which knows the hearts, bear them witness, giving them the Ruach, even as he did unto us. And then it says in verse 9, and put no difference between us and them, purifying their hearts by faith. So the reason why he stood up and expressed that idea is to let people know that individuals was receiving the Ruach by faith, the power by faith, the entry into Israel, into the people by faith without getting circumcised. So that's just clear. That's clear. As we continued, then we see Paul and Barnabas started to declare all the things that was happening amongst the nations. Then James started to declare the fulfillment of the scripture from Amos chapter 9, I believe, in verse 15. It says, and to this agree the words of the prophets. This agree the words of the prophets, as it is written. After this, I will return and will build again the tabernacle of David, which is fallen down, and I will build it again, the ruins thereof, and I will set it up, that the residue of men might seek after Yah, and all the nations upon whom my name is called, saith Yah, who does all these things. So we discussed a little bit about the tabernacle of David, and it showed how when the nations or the Gentiles started receiving the Ruach, this was the fulfillment of not only the nations, but the Israelites and the nations were brought together to formulate the tabernacle of David. The tabernacle of David being rebuilt was the idea of the Ruach going into the Jews and Gentiles. Or the Israelites and the nations together. So together they form the tabernacle of David, as we see the expression being revealed here. Let me know if anybody has anything to say. I'm just recapping. So then he goes in to express what they should express to the nations. And he says in verse 19, it says, wherefore my sentence is that we do not trouble them from among the nations are turned to Elohim, but that we write unto them that they abstain from pollutions of idols, from fornication, things strangled, and from the blood. And we talked about how the reason why he expressed those things is because they were even though they believed, they were currently practicing those things, and they have not gotten to that in their study yet. We can see that in verse 21. It says, because Moshe of old time have in every city them that preach him, being read in the synagogues every Shabbat. So every Shabbat, the Gentiles were studying the Torah, but they were still practicing things that they have not studied yet. So what James was doing was he was expressing that they should abstain from those things according to the Torah, and then continue to study to learn everything else. So again, the Torah is brought up as, not only is the Torah brought up as the instruction for the Gentiles, but the major aspect of study by the nation was the Torah. The major aspect of study was the Torah. Verse 21, for Moshe of old time hath in every city them that preach him, being read in the synagogue every Shabbat. So the Torah was the main aspect of how they taught the nations. This is how they taught the nations. This is how we ought to teach the nation. People talk about the New Testament assembly, like we're the New Testament assembly. Guess what? We ought to be reading and teaching the Torah as well. The Torah is not only in the first 5 books, by the way. The Torah is stretched out in every prophet that preached. Every prophet that preached was to turn Israel back to the Torah. So they expounded and explained the Torah in order to get Israel to repent. So likewise, we see them in the New Testament, the disciples doing the same thing. Every Shabbat, reading the Torah to the Gentiles. You see? So now that we're in this aspect, we don't see the Torah being taken away. We don't see the law of Moses being put to the side. We're looking at the aspect of circumcision. The argument was that circumcision saves men. And that's what was incorrect about their explanation. Not that the Torah was done away with, but that it doing something to appease Elohim is not what Yah requires. He does not require us to circumcise to appease him, or to be saved, or to receive salvation, or to be connected to him, or to enter into a covenant. Go ahead, Emeka.
Yeah, one thing that's very interesting is when you look at those verses where it speaks on, these things, we're writing to you to, abstain from these things, right? And it speaks on the Torah. If you look at those things, number one, we always see that, Christians will try to say, we can eat, there's nothing that defiles us, like no food defiles us, and nothing that, goes into the body can defile you. But you see here, they're blatantly telling you to abstain from blood, abstain from meats that are strangled, and so abstain from things that are polluted with, polluted with idols. And so, that's, one thing to me that clearly sticks out. Like, if they're so stuck on the Mark chapter 7 verse where it says, all meat is purged through the belly, and all food, what it really is saying is all food is purged through the belly, because that's the actual word that's used there instead of meat. It's saying all food is purged through the belly, and that nothing can defile you. Why are they sitting here telling, the Gentiles to abstain from blood, from meat strangled, and from things polluted, with idols? That's just the first thing. Now, the second aspect of it is, if you look at it, because I've heard people try to use this defense that, see, these are the things that they're telling Gentiles to, the commandments they give to Gentiles, as if Gentiles only have to worry about those 4. And then I'm like, okay, well, what about respect, honor your mother and your father? What about do not steal? What about do not kill? Are Gentiles excluded from those things because this is what they've written to the Gentiles? Like, no. It's very clearly stated that, yes, these are the major things that you suffer from: fornication, pollution of idols, blood, and strangled meat. But like it says, Moshe has his Torah being taught in the synagogue every Shabbat, and they should seek further counsel and guidance from those elders who are teaching the Torah of Moshe. And so, when people try to give you this argument of, the Torah doesn't, Gentiles don't have to keep the commandments, or these are the things that they wrote to Gentiles. It's like you got to look at the overall picture, and see exactly what it's actually saying. So, now I just wanted to point that out because those are things I see that are used, excuses that are used. So, I just want to point that out.
No, absolutely, I agree with you 100%. Like, you can't use, especially in this chapter, you can't use these things as those ideas as excuses. Especially considering the fact that even the method in which they're reaching out to the nations is not to bombard them with every single law in the Torah, but things that are currently affecting the lifestyle of the person. Like, if I know somebody is fornicating, right? I'm gonna express that fornication should stop when I also express to him about repentance. You see what I'm saying? When I send a person home to go study, I'm gonna first express a few things that they currently are, that I know of, are doing, that their minds and not only their minds, but that their minds and bodies may be set apart as they choose to follow more. You know what I mean? So this is exactly what's happening. Like, when you read Corinthians, when you read different things, Romans, you'll see that Paul had to continuously express about the pollutions of idols, the things strangled, the blood, and even the fornication. You see what I'm saying? That's happening amongst the Gentiles. Not only amongst the Gentiles, but also amongst the Israelites that were scattered as well. So when we're talking to somebody about turning to Yah, we also have to analyze what things can be helpful for them to turn away at this moment. I'm not going to ignore the fact that this person is a thief. I'm going to tell this person about stealing. I'm not going to go into the whole, 600 laws or instructions. I'm going to go into the ones that pertain to him from what I know of and let him pursue the rest. This is exactly what it says. Moshe of old time in every city that preach him, being read in the synagogues every Shabbat. So they don't have to go into everything. Now, anybody wants to read the next 10 verses from verse 22 to 30?
Yeah, I'll read.
All right, brother.
It says here in chapter 15, verse 22, then pleased it the apostles and elders with the whole assembly to send chosen men of their own company to Antioch with Paul and Barnabas, namely Judas, surnamed Barsabas, and Silas, chief men among the brethren. And they wrote letters by them after this manner, the apostles and elders, and brethren, and greeting unto the brethren which are of the Gentiles in Antioch and Syria and Cilicia. For as much as we have heard that certain which went out from us have troubled you with words, subverting your souls, saying, you must be circumcised and keep the law, to whom we gave no such commandment. It seemed good unto us, being assembled with one accord, to send chosen men unto you, with our beloved Barnabas and Paul, men that have hazarded their lives for the name of our sovereign Yahusha Messiah, we have sent through therefore Judas and Silas, who shall also tell you the same things by mouth. For it seemed good to the Holy Spirit and to us to lay upon you no greater burden than these necessary things, that you abstain from meats offered to idols, and from blood, and from things strangled, and from fornication, from which if you keep yourselves, you shall do well, fare you well. So when they were dismissed, they came to Antioch, and when they had gathered the multitude together, they delivered their epistle.
You can read verse 31.
Which when they have read, they rejoice for the consolation.
Okay. What you got? What you going to pull out?
I think, it's interesting. Again, we continuously see in the book of Acts speaking about the Gentiles. And here we see it in verse 23. It says, Towards the end of the verse, it says, "Send greeting unto the brethren, which are of the Gentiles in Antioch and Syria and Cilicia." So here they call the Gentiles who have been, who are now brethren, who are Gentiles. They call them brothers, and most of the time we continue to see like there's this understanding of this is I guess you would call the grafted in. So I just thought that was interesting. I'll look up the word though, just to double check.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And then we also see the beginning of when Paul began to write the letters. It says in verse 22, "It pleased the apostles and the elders with the whole assembly to send chosen men of their own company to Antioch with Paul and Barnabas," referring to Yahuda, surnamed Barsabas, and Silas, chief men among the brethren. "And they wrote letters by them after this manner," meaning that they dictated letters to Paul and Barnabas dictated the letters to Judah and Silas, or Judas and Silas, to write. Just like how he did with Luke. He dictated certain books to Luke, and Luke wrote it down. Where it says, "Men and brethren, greeting unto the brethren which are in the nations, which are of the nations in Antioch, Syria, and Cilicia." Yeah, I think that's very important to grasp as well,
Yeah.
like you said.
Yeah. And it's also we see in that same section of 22, 23, we see there are positions in the assembly. It says the apostles, the elders, with the whole assembly.
Right.
And so that's an interesting point I see too, is that, and then they send chosen men of their own company to Antioch.
Right.
With Paul. So then it was specifically, I would say, those that were well learned, almost like a lawyer, a lawyer of the law, like a teacher, somebody who's done their diligence, I guess. Somebody who's, of course, like we're
Who's
supposed to be.
known.
Yeah, we're supposed to
They
be
have to be,
disciples. We're supposed to be disciples, and so we're all disciples of Messiah, and so that's why I was seeing right there is just that understanding.
I think a lot of people get confused of the order of function, and they sound like Miriam. "Oh, Yah uses all of us." Of course, Yah uses all of us. He wants all his people to be prophets. That's what he told Moses in Numbers chapter 11. But he still used Moses. You see what I'm saying? He still called the 70 elders. He still called Aaron. You see what I'm saying? I think we have to recognize that when Yah has called individuals to do something, or when individuals like this ministry, unfortunately, this ministry began with, some a breaking, but it was a breaking of the leadership. The leadership, for me and the other elders, we didn't know what was gonna happen. We were just gonna start it, even if it was just us. You see what I'm saying? We didn't expect everybody to go after us. We expected people to do the right thing, and Yah bless this fellowship, because everyone is going where they're learning, going where they're growing, going where they're building fellowships, going where they're building friendships, brotherhood, and it's not because, hey, the elders started this ministry. No, it's because we set up a platform where all of us can build this thing, where we can work together. But you can't ignore who Yah uses around us. Remember when we go back in the book of Acts, they told them to find the deacons. The 7 deacons that came about, I believe is in Acts chapter 6 or 7. He told them, "Look for choice men among you, who is filled with the Ruach among you. You choose it." You see what I'm saying? So we need to start realizing that it's not about a ranking system, but there have to be like a respect for who Yah has called already before he calls everyone else to specific missions. You know what I mean? So in this ministry, it started with, us three, and when we came over here, everyone came over here, and everyone is growing, and everyone is beginning their own ministry as well. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, I was just thinking about those specific things that the Gentiles were instructed not to do, eat blood and fornicating and all that stuff. And it's interesting in when I think it's First Corinthians. It talks about let me go
Yeah.
get over to real quick.
1 Corinthians 5.
It's six. First it says flee. No, I'm sorry. 1 Corinthians 6:18 says flee fornication. Every sin that a man doeth is without the body, but he that committeth fornication sinneth against his own body. And then I think the one you're talking about, the other one, it talks about how fornicators, idolaters,
Right.
there's different sins that these people won't inherit the kingdom of heaven. And so it's interesting that it's like you said, you got to put out the fire before anything else. Put out anything that's going to it seems like I know some people say that all sin is the same as far as as a hierarchy, or as a way of thinking and things like that. But it looks like some sins, when it comes to depending on what it is, or aren't on that same. It carries a heavier penalty as far as the impact on your life and on your salvation and things like that. Even when we look at in a natural sense, in a natural law, like we don't kill someone for jaywalking. So even in the natural, we don't. The certain, you have misdemeanors, you have felonies, and things. You have things that carry a heavier punishment than others and stuff. So I just wanted to affirm what y'all was talking about earlier. So, yeah.
Right. I think that one thing that we are not ignoring is the fact that sin has a consequence built in within it. It has a consequence where it kind of affects or hurts our mental state. You see what I'm saying? Like drunkenness, extortioners, fornicators. Like you just read, the sin that's done outside the body, drunkenness, the eating food that's strangled, the eating the blood. All of that stuff affects your actual body, which then affects your mind. You see what I'm saying? There's a direct connection between your body and mind. It's either your mind can control your body, or your body can control your mind. So what he's trying to tell them to do is to control the discipline, even their bodies, so they can serve well, so they can actually serve Yah better. And I think that a lot of times we ignore the fact that what we put in our bodies affect our minds and affect our thinking, the way that we serve Yah. So we need to be very, very clear on not separating the fact that by polluting our bodies, we can also pollute our mind, and by polluting our mind, we also pollute how we interact with Yah. So this is very important. Keep your bodies clean. Why? Because your body is a temple of the Ruach. 1 Corinthians 6 and 2 Corinthians 6 talks about the body being belonging to Yah, and it's a habitation of Him. So even in our physical bodies, we ought to not pollute it, because it will affect us spiritually. But definitely, Brian, that was a good insight. And that's right. Even in the natural, we don't, this thing, jaywalking, right? Jaywalking may not get you the death penalty, but it also has a consequence. People get hit by cars for jaywalking. People get hit by bikes. People get run over by buses because they're jaywalking. So there, even though there's a consequence for sin, for every single sin, it doesn't mean that there's a direct punishment for those things. You see what I'm saying? Like rape and murder and these things, there's direct punishment. There's city of refuge for murderers, not for, you know, somebody that steals $5. Like they didn't build a city of refuge for that. There's more intense situations that we have to recognize. It's more intense, but it's not that other situations do not have consequences. Every sin has a consequence, but some have a worse consequence than others. All right, so we're in Acts chapter 15, breaking this down a little bit more. Anybody want to read verse 32 down to the end? 32 down to the end.
I'll read.
All right, go ahead.
And Yehuda and Sila, being themselves also Nebim, encouraged the brothers with many words and strengthened them. And having spent some time, they were sent back in peace, brothers and the missionaries. But it seemed good to Sila to remain. And Shal and Barnabas continued in Antiochia, teaching and bringing with many others also the good news, the word of Yahuah. And after some days, Shal said to Barnabas, "Let us now go back and visit our brothers in every city where we proclaim the word of Yahuah and see how they are." And Barnabas proposed to take with them Yohanan called Marcos. But Shal thought it not fit to take with them the one who withdrew from them in Pamphylia and had not gone with them to the work. A sharp feeling therefore came to be, so that they parted from one another. And so Barnabas took Marcos and sailed to Cyprus, and Shal chose Sila and went off, being committed by the brothers to the favor of Elohim. And he went through Syria and Cilicia, strengthening the assemblies. Should I keep going?
All right. Is that all the way to the end?
That's, the end of 15.
Yep, that's it. You want to pull out anything? Anything stands out to you?
To be honest, I'm trying to catch up here. I kind of just jumped in late. I mean, it seems like they're trying to spread the good news from the word of Yahuah.
Praise Yah, exactly. All right, so thank you, man. Thank you, brother. Does anybody else want to see anything that stands out before we start pulling out specific things?
Yeah, I mean, what's amazing is that we see in verse he says, where does he say? They went back. Oh, okay, in verse 36. He says, "And some days after Paul said unto Barnabas, Let us go again and visit our brethren in every city where we have preached the word of Yahuah and see how they do." And so that's pretty amazing. You know, they didn't just go from city to city and then just never go and just let it be. You know, they went back to actually see how they're doing and if they're still preaching the truth. You know, and I feel like that's what's happened today, is that people, that's what's happened, is it's never come back to that truth. It's just kind of been, it's like when they say you give a message and the next man gives a message to the next man, to the next man. Next, you know, you got this diluted message at the end, you know, and nobody's come back to reaffirm the truth and say, okay, let's pull it back a little bit. Let's go back to this truth and get back in, you know. So I thought that was amazing, you know, and I think something that we should take in today for ourselves when we're planting seeds with our brothers and sisters in the world,
right?
Friends, family, whatever it may be, that it's a continuing. Let me catch up back with this dude or the sister. Let's connect and let's talk about what where they're at, see where they're going, and da da da. You know, so I just thought that was amazing.
Right. Praise Yah for Polo and Zoom. So even if we're in different places, we can still constantly be in contact with believers, new believers, old believers. It don't matter. You know, while we have it, we need to take advantage of it. You know, for His will though, not for our entertainment, our little, you know, our idleness. You know what I mean? So we need to focus on everything promoting Yahuah, promoting His word, promoting His lifestyle, promoting His instruction, everything. You know what I mean? Because it's gonna get cut soon. It's gonna get cut soon. We don't have to talk about those conspiracy theories right now, but they're true. All right, so we have them going around preaching. We have them being joined by you know, choice men. Verse 32, Yehuda and Silas being prophets also themselves. Verse 32. You see, many people, they look at the New Testament like there's no prophets. All of these dudes is prophets. All of these dudes is prophets. Philip was a prophet. Peter was a prophet. Paul was a prophet. These dudes are prophets. You see what I'm saying? That's why it says Judas and Silas, being prophets also themselves, exhorted the brethren with many words and confirmed. You see what I'm saying? And after they stayed there for a short space, they said they were let go in peace from the brethren unto the apostles. You see, then I think Nabim means prophets. So you see that all of his people were being blessed with the spirit, with the gift of prophecy, spirit of prophecy. So we can't, you know, a lot of times we overlook the fact that there's prophets that don't write books. Even in the Old Testament, there's prophets that's mentioned that they don't even mention their name, you know, but there's prophets all throughout the Old Testament, all throughout the New Testament. Remember, Messiah talks about it when he says, oh, you who have killed the prophets. When we look back, we don't really see the writers of a lot of these prophets being killed, but there were many other prophets that were not mentioned, that did not write books, that were killed, that Yah sent. So there were many prophets in these generations. You know what I mean? So now in the book of Acts, we have Judas and Silas also are prophets. And they're preaching the word. Then we get into this battle that they had. As they were preaching the word in Antioch, they were talking about going and visiting the brethren. Barnabas said, hey, let's take John, whose surname was Mark, which we believe is the same person who wrote the book of Mark, by the way. Verse 37, Barnabas determined to take with them John, whose surname was Mark, but Paul thought not good to take him with them, who departed from them from Pamphylia and went not with them to the work. You see what's happening right here?
Yeah.
So Paul is like, you didn't want to come with us to do the work in Pamphylia, so I don't want you to come with me now. You see, this is all coming from Acts chapter 13. Let's look at Acts chapter 13 real quick so we could get a refresher of what happened.
I got
So
a cross
Acts
reference.
chapter, huh?
So I got a cross reference when you're ready.
Okay. So in Acts chapter 13, they were thrown in prison. They were thrown in prison for let me see. Let me see. I'm not sure if they were thrown in prison. No, they wasn't thrown in prison. Sorry. They were in a town where they were preaching, and they got a lot of uproar in that town. And there was a deputy that that wasn't letting them leave, and then he let them go. And it says starting in verse 12, it says, then the deputy, when he saw what was done, he believed, being astonished at the teaching of Yah. Now when Paul and his company loosed from Paphos, they came to Perga in Pamphylia, and John departed from them and returned to Jerusalem. Jerusalem was where the other apostles were located. So it looked like when everything was getting a little rough, he left them and went to Jerusalem at that time. So that's what Paul is recalling. He's saying, when things got rough over here, you left us. You didn't come with us to do the work. So now he doesn't want them with him. See, people have these type of issues. These are real life stuff.
Yeah.
These are real people with real, thoughts and reasonings that, sometimes they end up in a contention like there is now. Verse 39, and the contention was so sharp between them, Paul and Barnabas, that they split. They separated. Barnabas took Mark and went to Cyprus, and Paul took Silas and left, and went to Syria and Cilicia, confirming the assemblies. What you going to say, brother JP?
Oh, just a cross-reference, Deuteronomy 20, verse 8 speaks, it says, and the officer shall speak further unto the people, and they shall say, what man is there that is fearful and faint-hearted? Let him go and return unto his house, lest his brother's heart faint as well as his heart. And I just thought that was an interesting cross-reference, speaking about this is real life. This is real life. When people are faced with real life circumstances, things can take a twist on people, where you really get scared, and some people have to really take a break. And Paul, to me, he's seen that. He said, nah, he needs to take a break. Like, he needs to get back in, so that was just interesting. I was thinking about this one.
No, yeah, things get scary. Things get scary when you're preaching the word. People act crazy, man. Crazy. I used to preach on the train in New York. Like, people go crazy. Police act crazy. So they start yelling, and
that's regular in New York.
Sometimes it look real demonic, man. Brian, you had your hand up, brother?
Well, no, I was just making a comment about how, like, this thing between Barnabas and Shaul, it's I don't know where refreshing is the right word, but it's just interesting that, like y'all was saying, these are people, real people, and with different personalities and different ways of thinking and stuff like that. And sometimes, you get that, you get those disagreements, and while working together in this walk and stuff. But the important thing is, I'll and I'm sure they probably did. I don't think it's recorded, but Barnabas and Paul or Shalom probably later on. I'm sure they probably later on reconciled and things.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah, so
it's recorded. Even Paul and Mark also reconcile later on. You see them communicating. But it's good to see, like, these two people. It said that they, in verse 39, the contention was so sharp between them. Nobody's saying, you don't have the Ruach. Oh, you don't have the Ruach. Oh, you don't have the. Oh, you're not really a servant of Yah. Nobody's doing that. Just because they're disagreeing and arguing doesn't mean nobody has the Ruach. You see what I'm saying? And this is what a lot of people get a lot of emotional confusion to. When people are very strong about certain things, it's not that that the people of Yah is not going to have disagreements or argue one amongst another. Is the mindset that we carry during this time, during that contention. You see what I'm saying? All they did was split. Later on, you do see them, like what Brian said, you do see them later on coming together. It doesn't talk about the reconciliation, but obviously they are reconciled because they're together. So very important to grasp. When we're arguing with one another, you don't just throw that someone is not as spiritual as you because they're coming at you. You don't do that. There's a fruit. There's still a fruit that you have to produce even while you're arguing. You know what I mean? There's still your mind still has to be submitted to the word, submitted to Yah while you're arguing. You know what I mean? So you have to make sure that even though you're arguing, you're still demonstrating that the Ruach is the one ruling you. You're not yelling to the top of your lungs. You're not, it says that the contention was sharp. Now that you got to remember, they both have the Ruach. So we're not going to think in our mind that they're fist fighting or they're shoving each other, throwing rocks at each other or whatever. Like, we have to understand that even though you have the Ruach, individuals can still have that contention. Individuals can still disagree and sometimes need to separate even for a time. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah, don't flip no tables over.
Oh my God. It's just like a marriage, man. Like, even sometimes in a marriage, sometimes you have to take time before you come together and discuss certain things. You know what I mean? And what people are not doing is they're not looking at the brethren as like, we're all in a covenant with Yah, but we're also in a covenant with one another to love Yah with all your heart and to love your neighbor as yourself. We're in a covenant with one another. But what happens is we're more likely to disregard the covenant we have with each other and act like we have a perfect covenant with Yah. And that's not how it works. Just because you're arguing doesn't mean you have to split up for the rest of your life. You see what I'm saying? Don't mean that we have to go on somewhere else. But if a person is not repentant, of course, he tells you not to connect with that person. But outside of that, if you have a disagreement of who you're going to take with you, and you guys disagree so much that you guys have to just separate, doesn't mean one of them don't have the Ruach. I don't think a lot of times we play these games where just because someone is coming at you or disagreeing with you, that person doesn't have the Ruach because two people are fighting. No. Two people fighting, especially if they're not doing it outside of the fruit of the Ruach, if they're disagreeing and it's becoming sharp and contentious, you stop and you part ways for a little while. It doesn't mean anyone doesn't have the Ruach. But there is a sign to see when they don't have the Ruach. You see what I'm saying? There is things that do show you. There is fruit that do show you. And we just got to keep our eyes open to those things and not proclaim that our brother doesn't have the Ruach because you disagree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to say real quick without going into any, but I just want to say the timing the timing of this, of rereading this is like amazing, and you all know what I'm talking about. But this is the timing. This is like perfect timing for reading this passage. That's all I want to say.
Yeah. Well, all right, we don't have to go into
Praise Yah.
Battle over Enoch right now? Nah. I mean, it's not to me. Like, there's no, like, I want to, like, I have arguments with my brothers, my blood brothers. I count my brothers in Yah closer than my blood brothers. So why would I not expect to bump heads with my brothers that I hold closer? It's just not realistic to act like we're just gonna have like a flower relationship instead of one day annoying each other. Like, let's just be real. I think a lot of times we're not real. We have a church mentality where everybody has to put on their best face. And I think that we need to be more vulnerable than that. You know what I mean? In order for us to become a unit, we have to be more vulnerable. We have to look at how we disagree. We have to analyze one another rather than professing that another person is hell-bound because they're not agreeing with your idea. So, I praise Yah that Yah wants us to be vulnerable. He wants us to open up to one another as we do to him, so that way we can become one. He wants us to become one, So I want to also do a proof text of verse 32. It says, Judas and Silas, being prophets, also themselves exhorted the brethren with many words and confirmed. And I want to point that out in Numbers chapter 11. I think Emeka mentioned this last week about the prophets. Numbers chapter 11. And then he said, verse 25, it says, And Yah came down in a cloud and spake unto them. He took the ruach that was upon him, Moses, and gave it to the 70 elders. And it came to pass that when the ruach rested upon them, that they prophesied and did not stop. But there remained two men in the camp, and one of the name was Eldad, and the other name was Medad. And the ruach rested upon them, and they were of them that were written. But they didn't go out to the tabernacle, and they prophesied in the camp. And there rose a young man and told Moshe and said, Eldad and Medad are prophesying in the camp. Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of Moshe, one of his young men, answered and said, Master Moshe, forbid them. So this is Joshua telling him to stop them. Verse 29 says, And Moshe said to him, Envious thou for my sake? Are you jealous for me on my behalf? Would Elohim that all Yah's people were prophets, and that Yah would put his ruach upon all of them. You see that? And then it says, and Moshe got him into the camp, and he and the elders of Israel. So we see that Yah never wanted to restrict the pouring out of his ruach. He wanted his ruach to be on all men, on all of his people, that all of his people prophesy.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times we get so caught up on leadership that we don't realize that the leadership is supposed to promote or help other people get to the point where they do the same exact thing as the leaders. You see what I'm saying? The elders, Moshe and the elders are supposed to build other people up to be elders themselves, not to continue to feed and depend on them. You know what I mean? This is how we spread it to all the earth, by building each other up, so that way we can all do the same thing and believe the same thing and think the same way and move the same way and have the same ruach, have the same mind. You see what I'm saying? But if I'm continuously hiding information in order for you to come to me every Shabbat, or go to a pastor every Shabbat, or go to a, whatever it is, whoever it is, it doesn't make any sense that they're not building people to do the same thing as them. You have to. That's the whole purpose of having elders, is to build other people to be elders as well. That's the whole purpose of having apostles, to build other people to have apostles, prophets, to build other people to be prophets, etc., etc. You see, because the whole purpose that Yah has for his people is that all of his people are prophets, and that he could pour his ruach on all of his people. You could see that in the book of Joel, chapter 2. That Yah says he will pour out his ruach on all flesh, it says. All flesh. That your women will prophesy, your men would dreams, your old women would, all of them, everything, everybody. And he said he's going to fulfill that. But we have to have a group of people that's going to build each other up, so everybody can be in that to receive that same power, that same ability to not only preach the word, but demonstrate that strength and that power in the world. So nobody here should be belittling themselves to someone else. Oh, this person knows this more than me. Nobody knows nothing if it wasn't given to them by Yah. Nobody knows nothing. So we're all on the same boat. We all know nothing except for what Yah allows you to know. So if I receive something that Yah gave me, you can receive the same exact thing. You're not far from it. But as for me, I know nothing. So we're all in the same boat. And if we keep our minds focused or associated with the lowly things and humble ourselves and not look at these ranks like it's something to be grasped or clung to, like we need to focus and submit ourselves to serve one another. You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
I'm sorry. Preaching to you guys now.
Hey, that's all right. That's all right. I just want to touch on that verse 24. I know we had talked about it right now, but he does say he says, for as much as we have heard that certain which went out from us have troubled you with words, subverting your souls, saying, you must be circumcised and keep the law, to whom we gave no such commandment.
Right.
And it's just I was just seeking more information on how it says, and keep the law, to whom we gave no such commandment. Are they kind of talking about back to what they were saying, like just the law, they'll keep the law over time, or you know what I mean? Because it kind of from I think I can see where people in the church today will see it like, look, right here it says, you know what I mean? You don't got to be circumcised and you don't got to keep the law.
Right.
You know, they gave no such commandment.
Yeah.
So, you know, I was just thinking about that part.
Right. No, that's a good question. So analyzing this, right? The person that's speaking is James. In verse 13 it says, and after they held their peace, James answered them and said, men and brethren, hearken unto me. So this is him talking. James said in verse 20, but that we write, verse 19 and 20, wherefore my sentence is that we don't trouble them, which are among the nations are turned to Elohim, but that we write unto them that they abstain from pollutions of idols, fornication, things strangled in the blood. Where are those things located? In the law, right? What does verse 21 say? Because Moshe of old time, every city, them that preach him, being read in the synagogues every Shabbat. What's being read? The Torah, the law of God, right?
Right.
And he's telling them to do things that's in the law of God, right? So when we get to verse 24 and he says that you must be circumcised to keep the law, to whom we gave no command. Did he not give a command to keep the law? Of course he did. He did multiple times already. But what did he say? What did they not command? That you must be circumcised and keep the law of circumcision to be saved. That's one thing that they did not say in here. Matter of fact, that's the contrast. So again, you would have to put this in the perspective of the law pertaining to circumcision rather than any other law, because he tells them to keep certain laws, and then he tells them that they're reading the law every Shabbat. So when he tells them that I gave no command, he's talking about circumcision only.
Yeah.
Because remember, the circumcision is not just cut the flesh off the foreskin. There's also instruction, 8 days old, you know, all of those instructions are not being told to them to perform according to the manner of Moses, which you see in verse 1.
Right.
Except you be circumcised after the manner of Moses is just like saying, like in the law of Moses. You know, so when we get to verse 24, he's telling them that circumcision wasn't a command that they had to do.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. I mean, well, as I was comparing it to other Bible translations, they've taken out, you must be circumcised and keep the law. Out of some of the most popular translations, I know one, of course, is the ESV, the English Standard Version. In that version, that verse itself, 24, says, since we have heard that some persons have gone out from us and troubled you with words, unsettling your minds, although we gave them no instructions.
Yeah.
So, you know what I mean?
Yeah, maybe it's not supposed to even be in there. Huh?
Well,
and then when you look at it, Yeah, go ahead, bro.
Well, I was gonna say I pulled up on Bible Hub. I looked up the actual verse, which to me, on Bible Hub they do a great job with giving you the actual manuscript, and
Mm-hmm.
it's there. It's there in on Bible Hub on that specific verse. You know what I mean? So I was kind of wrestling with it and saying, okay, what is this? You know what I mean? I know
Yeah.
they've taken it out of these newer versions, beside the King James and the New King James and some of the maybe like Hebrew Bibles and things like. But you know, where is it more effective? I was kind of thinking about right now. Is it more effective to have it in there or not? You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, you
So,
could keep it in there. Verse 1, 5, and 24 all say the same thing.
right,
That
right.
they have not taught that you need to be circumcised to be saved. You see,
So that's interesting.
that's you have to conclude that, because that's the whole purpose of this meeting, is that some were saying you had to be saved, some were saying you didn't. You see what I'm saying? So the whole purpose of this meeting is mentioned in verse 24.
Yeah,
It's just when you're looking at English translation, you have to keep the context alive, uh, and not submit yourself to English translation or English words. Like when you read putting all of them together, verse 1, verse 5, and verse 24, you'll see that the whole focus is circumcision only.
right, right,
Nobody mentions anything else, you know. And the
yeah,
whole point of being upset that the nations were receiving the Ruach is because the nations are not circumcised. So that's why that's where they were feeling some type of way, because they're not circumcised and they were receiving the Ruach. So even Peter had to stand up and explain that they were receiving the Ruach just like they received the Ruach, and they were not even circumcised. So that's the
right.
whole idea in this whole chapter is a focus on the fact that these Pharisees are saying that you needed to be circumcised to receive salvation. And that's
Yep.
that was the problem. Go ahead, Emeka. Emeka?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, one thing I thought was, to go, a little bit further on this, question or this situation, what was being brought to them is, when you think about the commandment of circumcision, right? When we look at the commandment of circumcision, what we see is that in order to be able to keep the Passover, right? We see in order to be able to keep the Passover, if a stranger wanted to keep the Passover with the Israelites, they had to be circumcised, and then they could be, they could live in the camp and be considered as one that is born among the camp. And the difference is that now when we see Yahusha, you have Yahusha, and what does the scripture say? Instead of it saying, whosoever of the Gentiles or the strangers that wants to sojourn with you shall be circumcised in order to keep the Passover, it's whosoever believes that Yahusha HaMashiach is the Son of Man shall be saved. And so that is, part of, what takes away the circumcision, the commandment, or, circumcision to be saved, or circumcision to be considered a part of Israel. That is exactly what takes it away, is that now we have this new commandment, which is that whosoever believes in the Son of Elohim, that Yahusha HaMashiach is the Son of Elohim, he died and resurrected, shall be saved, and we know that if you believe in him, you will keep his commandments. And so it's the belief of Yahusha that overrides the circumcision of the flesh, because now we're speaking on, we're still in line with the commandments of the Father, and so I just wanted to clear that up because I definitely know this question is one that, it's one that sparks debate. So,
Oop, I think he's lost reception. It's like a TV. Alright,
Yeah.
let me see. Give me 1 second. Yeah, man. The connection, when you look at Genesis 17, the connection of circumcision was also directly connected to Abraham receiving a seed, right?
Yeah.
And that the circumcision was the token, verse 11 of Genesis 17, that the circumcision of the flesh of the foreskin was a token of the covenant between them.
Right.
So when you're looking at the seed and you're looking at the token of the seed, let's look at what it says in Galatians. You see, Galatians, so he not only says the seed, but then he says everybody among you. So everybody wasn't his seed, because remember, he only had Ishmael at that moment. So everyone wasn't his child. There was a bunch of people from different nations that was a part of him, that joined him. So he told them, everybody among you have to be circumcised. This is going to be the token of the promise that I've given to you. Talking about a future seed. He wasn't talking about the seed that he had already. He was talking about a future seed. So when you look in Galatians chapter 3, if I could find Galatians. All right, Galatians chapter 3. When you look at verse,
Yeah, I have a bite.
starting from verse 16, right? It says,
Yeah.
now to Abraham and his seed were the promises made. And he said, not and to seeds as of many, but as of one, and to your seed, which is Messiah. You see that?
Yep.
So when he gave the promise to Abraham and his seed, he was talking about the promised seed that everybody knew was going to come. Even Adam was given that promise in Genesis chapter 3 of a seed of the woman that was supposed to come and crush the serpent's head.
Yeah.
That seed was promised since Adam. So here he's giving that promise to Abraham of him being blessed in the promised seed, but he says for everybody with you to be circumcised as a token of this covenant. So now that the seed came, how is the circumcision of the flesh a token of the coming seed if he has already come? You see, is the token of the covenant of the seed that Abraham was going to receive that he did not receive at that moment. So now that the seed is here, why are we going to continuously give us a token of the promised seed when the promised seed has come? Let me let a few of you guys go. I saw Mecca and then Mike. Go ahead, Mecca.
Yeah, so no, absolutely. And then we also see that looking at the apostles, including Shaul, they say do we then make void the law or the Torah by our faith? Never. He says how shall we who are I'm sorry, he says he says that in Romans 3:30 and 31. He says do we do away with the law because of our faith? He says Elohim forbid. We establish the law. On the contrary, we establish the law through our faith. So you can see even through all the New Testament, we see each and every disciple saying and you know, the law, that we keep the law, you know, that the law is good. You know, Shaul states it over and over again that the law is good. You know, we have John, James, I mean, every single, you know, Peter, every single disciple says that, and Yahusha says himself, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. So the only thing that really changed, you know, according to what we see in that, you know, what that verse that JP brought out is that, you know, the circumcision is really exactly what is taken away. You know, that's not the requirement for salvation anymore, you know, or to be considered a son of Elohim, or to be considered a part of, you know, of the you know, the nation of Israel. You know, it's no longer needed. So I just wanted to clarify, you know, just definitely, you know, I definitely appreciate the verse you just brought out, because I think that, you know, that brings it home.
Yeah, absolutely. Circumcision it was given to point or to remind us of the faith that we were going to have, of the one that was going to, you know, that has been and will help us, you know, circumcise our hearts. You see what I'm saying? So after the seed has been completely, especially Passover, like when you're looking at Passover, that's a direct connection to Messiah's death as well. So you have him promising the Messiah's birth to Abraham, and then in Passover, prophesying the Messiah's death in order for punishment to pass over us. So even in Passover, the Messiah is an emphasis of why certain things is happening. We're being passed over because the Messiah is sacrificed for us. You know, Passover lamb was sacrificed so that Yah could pass over us. It was the direct connection to the Messiah. So when we have the Messiah here, why are you circumcising? It was a token for him to remind us of him, of his coming, and that he was going to come through a line. You see what I'm saying? So now that he's already come through a line, the bloodline, what's the purpose of circumcision, or the token of the circumcision? You see, there is no point. There's no point of a circumcision because it points to the coming of the seed through the bloodline. It already happened. When you read Genesis 17, that's literally the one of the main purposes of putting that reminder to the people with Abraham, is that the reminder will remind them of the promise of the seed that was to come. Mike, you had your hand up, brother?
I'll go later.
I'll go later.
You mean after we turn off the recording?
That's fine.
All right. So, and we also got to know the difference between doing away with a law and Messiah fulfilling a law. Those are two different things. You see what I'm saying? Just because he fulfilled sacrifice doesn't mean he done away with sacrifice. See, when you fulfill something, you bring it to reality. You complete it. You make it real. You see what I'm saying? That's what fulfilling means. When you make void a law, it means you throw it away. you make it insignificant. Circumcision is significant. It is significant. It is the whole circumcision. The physical circumcision is significant in teaching the spiritual circumcision. Is the physical circumcision necessary to be spiritually circumcised? Absolutely not. Because in Romans chapter 2, it teaches us that those individuals that were physically circumcised, because they broke the Torah, they were spiritually uncircumcised. And that's why Paul was teaching, like, your circumcision doesn't do nothing because you're breaking the Torah while you're circumcised. So the circumcision of the heart is what causes you to keep Torah. That's why that is the fulfillment. You see what I'm saying? So difference between fulfilling something and nailing something to the cross. The penalty of sin was nailed to the cross. The curse was nailed to the cross. You see what I'm saying? The penalty was taken away, was made void. The death penalty that was for us, that was made void. Not any law. The law could not be made void. That's why the Messiah had to die for our penalty, because he could not make that law void, that we should die for our sin. You see what I'm saying? So we can't say that any law was made void, because that's the whole reason why Messiah had to die, because you can't void the law. You can't void it. It can't be taken away or removed or done anything with it. It has to be accomplished, period. You see what I'm saying? So, all right. So let me, any questions before we close? Sounds good.
Nope.
JP, go ahead.
No. I just want to, I mean, I said it on the last study, and I know we got it clear, but just to say it again,
Yeah.
but of course with the circumcision, like you said, it was a token, and so again, I think like the scriptures show in Acts 15, that not to be saved. I think that's the emphasis. The emphasis is not to be saved. You don't need to be circumcised to be saved. Of course, in the flesh, but in reality, you need to be circumcised in your heart. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
To be saved.
That's what
So, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So it's pretty
absolutely.
interesting, when you flip those words around and you start to really take a notice of like how we put it all together right now, and you emphasized on what you spoke about right now about Galatians. You get to really see the bigger overall picture, and and we spoke about that the last meeting about the circumcision of the heart didn't just happen in the New Testament. It happened way in Genesis. It was spoken of. So
Right.
it's amazing. Circumcision of the heart is amazing. Shalom.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Shalom. There's one aspect I wanted to cover also. I know we covered it last week, but when we break up a study, people may see this one and not see the last one. So there was one thing in Acts chapter 15 that I wanted to reiterate. It was Acts 15 verse where he talks about putting a yoke on us that our fathers were unable to bear. Let me let Mike go first. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I don't know if you mentioned this already or not. So I don't waste time. Did you already correlate physical circumcision to physical sacrifices?
I did mention the sacrifice being fulfilled, just like how circumcision was fulfilled.
Okay, I'm not
but
gonna
maybe there's a different angle. I don't know.
Well, it's a pretty straight cut. I won't read it. I won't reiterate.
Oh, by the way, Passover lamb was actually a sacrifice in Exodus chapter 12. I believe verse 27. It says that the Passover lamb is Yahuah's sacrifice.
Yes.
So we don't sacrifice anymore. So we don't kill lambs on Passover, because that was Yahuah's sacrifice that he made when Messiah died. So circumcision, it was a token, but with the promised seed to come through the line of Abraham. So all those in the line of Abraham would have had that sign or that token on them. So that way everyone was waiting for that promised seed, obviously, when you read through the scripture. So when the promised seed has come and the nations are now receiving the Ruach without being circumcised, you know that it is fulfilled, that they were being saved without sacrifice, because it was fulfilled, that they were being being saved without going to the temple and seeing the Levitical priest. Why? Because it was complete. It was
That's
fulfilled.
another
So,
part.
yeah. So all those things are fulfilled doesn't mean that they're being made void. Those are two different things.
Okay, since you did the sacrifice, I can do the temple. You know, everybody knows now, you know, that our bodies are the temple, you know, and we as the body are the temple, which is why we don't feel the need to go to a physical temple. In fact, most of us believe that that's going to be a type of abomination, to go to another temple and do sacrifices, because that's the point. So we all have the understanding that we are the temple. But was there a physical temple before? Absolutely. So it's also the same thing as the circumcision. There is still a physical thing, but both of those have been fulfilled by the same person. So just as much confidence as we have in us being the temple, and that's not just a figure of speech or a saying, we're literally his temple because he literally dwells within us. We should have the same confidence of understanding, okay, just like I don't have to go to a temple because I am the temple, if my heart is circumcised, that's what he's requiring of me. That was it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So real quick before we close, I wanted to clarify again Acts 15, verse
10.
I just had it. Verse 10. Yeah, yeah. Thank you. And it says, now therefore, why do you tempt Elohim to put a yoke upon the neck of the disciples, which neither our fathers nor we were able to bear? Many people say that the law was the yoke. The law was the yoke. Absolutely not. Let me show you what they were doing that caused them not able to bear or not able to follow the law. When you look at Romans chapter 10, Paul expresses the righteousness. I believe it's chapter 10. Yeah. So when you look at Romans chapter 10, it talks about what the Israelites did. It says in verse 1 to 3, it says, brethren, my heart's desire and prayer to Elohim for Israel is that they might be saved, because I bear them record that they have zeal of Elohim, but not according to knowledge. Verse 3, it says, because they, being ignorant of Yah's righteousness, going about to establish their own righteousness, have not submitted themselves unto the righteousness of Elohim. For the Messiah is the result of the Torah for righteousness to everyone that believes. So we see clearly that the people were not doing Yah's righteousness, but trying to establish their own righteousness. So the yoke that was happening was that they were saying that you will be justified or saved, justified or made righteous by circumcision. This means that they would be able to set their own way of getting righteousness by their works. They were saying that by what we do, we make ourselves righteous. And that was the yoke that kept our forefathers in captivity. The thought that they can actually perform works to bring salvation upon themselves, rather than demonstrating faith or executing faith like Abraham did, where it was accounted to him for righteousness, meaning that righteousness was put in him by the Ruach. Here, it's saying that the yoke that our forefathers could not bear was that we also tried to perform laws to be saved, just like the idea of circumcising to be saved. You see, do we get it?
Yep.
I hope we grasp that, because many people think that the yoke is the actual law, and it's not. The yoke is the way that they tried to obtain righteousness, which is by their own works, like we read in Romans chapter 10, verse 1 to 3.
Yeah, and that's the biggest argument today that we're contending with the church of today, is that the law being done away with, and you can't be saved by the law. And I was just connecting that with what you're saying right now.
Right.
There's just that contention with the law that they have misunderstood. And this is, and of course the verse you pointed out in 15:10 of Acts, it's one of those verses that they have turned to. A lot of the people I spoke with, those few that I spoke with, have brought that verse in and said, oh, well, it's a yoke, it's a yoke, it's like bondage. And I'm like, man, you must be not worried, and that, it just goes on from there. But yeah, I see what you're
Right.
going with it though.
Yeah. Yah did not set Israel free from Egypt to put them back in bondage at Sinai. That don't make sense.
Right. Right.
So he set us free. He gave us a law of liberty, a law that shows us how to be free from sin.
Yeah.
Sin was what was holding us captive, not Egypt.
Right. Definitely.
So
still here.
yeah.
Still here.
So all right. So we're gonna close this. Thank you for joining us. Acts 15 concluded finally.